You are listening to the Next Level Sports Podcast, Episode 1, featuring Lauren Abarca from the New York Yankees, where today we'll be talking a little bit about fear and routines in minor league baseball. Let's do it.
Welcome to the Next Level Sports Podcast. Take your game to the next level today by learning mental skills from top-level coaches and professionals.
Welcome, everyone, to Episode 1 of the Next Level Sports Podcast, where my guest today is Lauren Abarca. And as a former collegiate athlete, Lauren acquired a passion for improving sports performance through mental strengthening. Lauren went on to receive her master's in performance psychology from National University. Nowadays, Lauren is continuing her passion for improving performance by working with elite-level professional athletes and Olympic athletes. She currently holds the title of Mental Conditioning Coordinator with the New York Yankees. So tell me a little bit about your role with the New York Yankees.
So my role with them is as a mental conditioning coordinator, is just to work with our players on the mental side of baseball. And I'm sure we can all agree that baseball is a pretty mental sport. And so some of those things that it entails is stuff like performance anxiety, focus, dealing with fear, managing fear when you're out there and not allowing those kinds of things to hold us back from doing what we do best. Stuff like your motivation, stuff like confidence. So those are some of the things I work with our players. And my job is really to be there as a support. You know, they do not have to work with us. It's more of like, we're here if you need us.
Excellent. Excellent. And what would be some of the biggest challenges that you would face in that role?
I would say sometimes, that's a really good question. I would say sometimes you can struggle with buy-in. I mean, I think when we go into like new situations, what we want to do is fix, we want to help, we want to find solutions. But sometimes the best thing to do is just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
And so I think finding that balance between when to be the leader, when to be the follower, when to let your players, figure it out themselves, and when they really could use some guidance. So to me, I think that can be a struggle, but I think the more that you do it, the more you kind of figure out, your style and what path works best for that particular client.
Excellent. Excellent. And as far as you work with the minor league players, you roll all around the different minor league teams for the Yankees, correct?
Correct.
Now, when new players come into the organization, have they had mental training before that, or for some players is this brand new to them?
Some it's new. Some they've had it. So a lot of college guys have typically had something to some degree, which is great because it means that it's definitely growing in the college realm. But some still don't, and some also we do battle sometimes them coming in and having really bad experiences with former mental performance coaches, and so sometimes it's also undoing and letting them figure it out on their own, but kind of allowing maybe a different way of looking at mental performance and again getting that buy-in again after they've already kind of like marked it off their list, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good mix of both.
Absolutely. And out of that, the vast majority, I'm just guessing here, that has not had mental training, that'll be more of like your high school type athletes that sign right out of high school.
Correct. Yeah. So most of the high school athletes have not had mental training. And if they had, it's awesome. A lot of them actually, I wouldn't say a lot, but I'd say probably a handful of them have been interested in it themselves. And they've been reading, they've been doing their own kind of research, and it's been more self-taught.
Yeah. And I know you and I are both on the same page that we are the firm belief that mental training definitely should start in the high school level.
100%. I think it should. I think it, regardless if the athlete like takes it and runs with it, I think planting the seed early could be super beneficial, because you never know. I mean, I don't know half the time whether or not the session I do in front of 60 players really like is benefiting them or not. Like sometimes you don't know. It's not like they're raising their hand, like, let me know if you got a whole hell of a lot out of this, or whatever that is. And then suddenly they'll, come up to you after a game and say, like, I just want you to know, like, the way that you explained focus really helped me today. And they're like, awesome. So sometimes even without knowing it, you can be helping them.
Yeah.
So keeping an open mind to that too, I think is important, because sometimes, I've heard people write it off like, well, they're not going to listen anyway. Well, don't use that as a reason not to at least give them the information.
Yeah. And, when you learn mental training in high school, we're learning it for the sports purposes, but the same tactics still apply to the everyday job. If they don't go on to college or they don't go on to pro ball, they can still use these same techniques in everyday life. So it's highly beneficial. And it's at a point where their brains are still very, very much in a learning state. So it's the perfect time to learn all these skills.
I could not agree more. I think the things that come with high school and that come with college, it's their new experiences. And so being able to navigate those in a way that's going to benefit you or not benefit you, but you'll be able to learn from it altogether, I think is huge, in learning the coping skills that are necessary to navigate that.
So tell me a little bit about how you transitioned from an athlete into the mental side of sports.
So I played collegiate soccer at the University of San Francisco, and then I transferred down to Point Loma Nazarene University. And I had already had a little bit of it. At USF, we had a mental coach that would come in weekly, and I was kind of into it, and there was some stuff I really loved, but I'll be honest, I wasn't totally bought in. And then when I got to Point Loma, I think that I was a really hard worker. Hard work was not an issue for me, but I do think that managing pressure, managing the fear of failure, managing like expectations for myself, I think that's where I struggled the most. And as my years went on at Point Loma, I ended up getting injured with several concussions and couldn't play anymore. And I happened to take an elective course in sports psychology. I was the only person in the class, fell completely in love with it, and started to use it that senior year when I was told I couldn't play anymore. I was like, how can I be of benefit to my girls, like on the sidelines? And so sometimes I would use some of the things that I would learn in class without even knowing it. And then like circle back and be like, oh, that's right, I read about that. Like, oh, that actually worked. And so I fell in love with it kind of throughout that process.
Awesome. So transitioning into working with pro athletes, what was the most surprising thing that you found out when you started working with pro athletes?
I think probably the most interesting thing that I think a lot of people will be surprised to know, especially, is that the pressure, the fear, the expectations, the being afraid to let other people down, that still exists with professional athletes. That doesn't go away. It's how we manage it that makes them successful or not. And so you'd be surprised how many athletes I work with that's what they come to me for. Like, I'm afraid to take the next step. I'm afraid to go out there and mess up, because if I do, what does that say about me? So I would definitely say that like all the things that, individuals like you're dealing with at your own personal level, no matter what level you're at, still exists, because when you think about it, the stakes are just higher. And so as we, every level demands a new level of us. And I think that knowing that and being able to adjust with it is important. Yeah.
So, I mean, for like the athlete who's maybe, in his high school game that's afraid of striking out in the big spot, pro athletes have that too, except it's like 10 times the amount of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, and again, I think it lends to that idea of like the earlier you start, the better, because the pressure is only going to increase. The stakes are only going to get higher. And so the earlier you can manage it, the better off you are, the less catch up you have to do.
Yeah. So if there's a high school athlete out there that's maybe has some fear of the big spot or the fear of messing up, what are some tips or strategies that they could do to manage that better?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest things is focusing back to yourself and what you can do in that moment. Because I think what fear tends to do is it focuses on the things that could go wrong instead of focusing on the things we need to do right. And so I would say one of the biggest things is being able to kind of write out what are those things that make you successful in the moment. And even looking back at our previous experiences, when was a time when you didn't handle pressure well, or you didn't handle fear well? And then what are some times that you did handle fear well, and what made one successful and one not? Then we can kind of dive deep into like, okay, I started thinking about this and that was very unhelpful, or I was able to slow my breathing down and really focus on, I need to just pay attention to what the pitcher's throwing, and then let my body do the rest from there. And so I think really focusing on what makes you successful instead of what could go wrong or what you've done wrong in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Take what you've already done so well and just model that. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that high school athletes need to know is that this is not something that's brand new. This is something that's very familiar to them. They've modeled things their entire life, even down to when you watch the Little League World Series on TV. Yankee fans cover your ears here, but how many, little leaguers do you see spitting in their hand and clapping their hand together like David Ortiz? That's a model behavior. This is something they're already doing. We just want them to do it in a different way to help manage fear, anxiety, nerves.
Mm-hmm, totally. And I think, too, it's finding what works for you. What works for somebody else may not work for you.
Yeah.
And so treating it as like an individual success versus like, what is everybody else doing to succeed? I think it's important too.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, like when I drive by a high school and, and there's a field out here where kids are playing, there's the kids that are practicing very intently. There's some that are, kind of picking the daisies in right fields. How can kids get the most out of practice?
I think you kind of mentioned it in the question is, what is your intent going into it? And a lot of times when we go to practice, I remember when I was younger and I would go to practice, it's like, oh, the coach is going to tell me what to do. You just show up and you just let the rest kind of unfold the way the coach wants it to. And so one of the things that we can do to even enhance what we're already doing is to create a purpose behind, what's our purpose today? Because no matter what the coach gives you, okay, let's say they have like 4 drills that they're going to do and you don't really know the drills until you show up there. You could focus on being present in the moment at every drill that you do. You can focus on, okay, I'm going to make sure if we do a drill that involves hitting, that I get into my back leg. That's going to be my focus and purpose for today. Or when I mess up, how quickly I respond. Like I'm going to focus on my response to failure. So regardless of what it is, it's maybe giving ourselves a purpose. And like Justin Suez says do things on purpose with purpose.
Yeah. Excellent. Now, do you think that when you get to the higher level athletes, they have a different mentality in practice versus a game?
Mm-hmm. I think that it's hard not to. Practice doesn't carry the stakes of performance, and it never will. And so I think that, I don't think we'll ever be able to mirror the two exactly. However, what we can do is we can control how we respond to practice. And so with the same intent, with the same focus, with the same intensity. Now, keeping in mind, it will be like a little bit different, when you step into, if you're in a stadium and there's under the lights and all that stuff, and there's people cheering and, 2-3 count, whatever it is, we can say a bunch of things that would make your intensity go up more. But how can you increase what you're already doing and just make it better? Whether that's increasing your intensity while doing it, whether that's, again, focusing on that one thing that you can control. And so I do think that it's treated differently, but I think that if we try to, intertwine practice and performance focus, then we can at least help that transition for when we get into the game, and being able to have an intent with a drill that's like, this is a performance drill. I'm going to treat this as I'm performing. And then maybe this one is, this is practice because there's more technical instruction involved, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So one is more of like a a, a technician-based kind of drill where we're working on mechanics, and the other is more, this is going to be as if there's really a pitcher out there, as if there's really, people cheering and booing in the stands. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you can add some of that intensity by, especially when you deal with competitors in sport, is just adding competition to it. Yeah. Increasing the stakes. Yes, it's not like a, CIF championship, but you don't want to lose your friend. And most of the time, if you're playing sports, you're pretty damn competitive. So that's going to come with it.
Now, what are your thoughts on, say somebody's at bat, and do you want them to have a completely empty mind? Do you want them to be focusing on things? What's your take on that?
I think it depends on the player. There are some players that are habitual overthinkers. That's when I simplify the crap out of their approach. Let's just simplify it, because their body already knows what to do. It's typically their overthinking or overanalyzing or thought process that can get in the way of stunting their ability to do what they do. So in those moments, I'd say, let's simplify it. It could be, a lot of times for overthinkers, it's hard not to think. So to tell them, please just clear your mind, they're going to be like, I don't know how to do that. I don't think I can do that. So making it more of a singular focus is important for them. Now, for players that are much more kind of laid back, clearing their mind and having an empty mind when they go up to bat may be really good for them. So I just think it does depend on the athlete and kind of what their approach typically is and what works with their personality.
Yeah. So for the athlete that their mind is always racing and wandering to different areas, perhaps giving them a strategy of something better to focus in on. So whenever I would be playing in a big game and I would get nervous when I was at bat, I would always just repeat, instead of there's somebody at third, I have to get them in or something like that. I would just repeat to myself, think one, react two. That way, I'm prepared for the fastball, and then I can react to something else. So that was my reminder. And I got so into that I would actually with my lips, verbalize it without saying it out loud. And then I had a pitcher come up to me after one game, what the heck were you telling me the whole time when I'm pitching? And that's when I realized, oh, wow, I was taking him off his game. And really, I was just focusing on myself. But instead of saying in my head, I was just moving my lips, saying, think one, react two. And it really messed him up. So that was to my benefit.
Yeah, no, and I did something very similar in college. My issue, and I think this also lends to what we're already talking about in terms of it also, I think what you focus on depends on kind of what pulls your focus away. Because for me, what pulled my focus away was, feeling insecure. And comparing myself. I compare myself mid-game. That ain't smart. And so my kind of focus cue or my phrase, and I would write it on my wrist, and it was SGIB, and it stood for she's good, but I'm better. And every time I said that to myself, it just pumped me up. Yeah. And it was my kind of refocus.
Yeah, that's getting me pumped up just hearing it. I want to start writing on mine. For the people that enjoy that mental space and clarity up at bat, appropriate that you work for the Yankees. One of the best quotes I ever heard was back in the day when Yogi was on an incredible hot streak hitting. A reporter came up to him after the game and said, Yogi, you're on an incredible hot streak. What are you thinking about when you're batting? And he goes, I can't think and hit at the same time. Mm-hmm. So for the people that enjoy that mental clarity, go for it. If that's what you need, and for those people, the interesting thing is when a thought pops up that takes so much attention away from what they're doing, that's really a good time to, step off the mound, to take a step out of the box for a second and just let go of whatever kind of garbage jumped in your mind for that moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, there's so many things that can take us away from what we do. When we're too busy thinking about what we do, it actually takes us away from what we're doing. And so being able to even having that anchor, there's so many different ways we can anchor our mind back in that present moment. And, whether it is a phrase, whether it is a physical cue, whether it is your breathing, those kinds of things you can only do in the present moment. And so being able to bring and draw your attention back intentionally, and then taking that step forward to like, okay, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
And it gives you that chance to kind of reset.
And I think the best thing for athletes, especially the high school ones, like you said, that on their own have gone out and, popped up the Google machine and read some books, it's really find that process that works for you. So for somebody, sometimes it is a physical anchor, doing a physical activity, or sometimes it's something auditory, hearing something in your mind, or having a coach tell you something that anchors in either a confident state or allows you to get rid of negative thoughts. To be able to find what works best for you and then use that to the fullest.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the really fancy words out there is visualization. So what does that mean to you?
Visualization, I mean, we use it in many different ways, but one of the ways I like to use it is not only to be able to experience something in our minds before doing it, but also to gain that clarity of what happened and then what we can do next time.
Yeah.
Really re-experiencing any kind of situation or experiencing something for the first time new, we can use that visualization because our mind doesn't know the difference between imagination and action. So we can still build those neural pathways. We can still have an impact on how our brain learns just by simply visualizing it. And so it's such a great tool, not just for if you're learning a new experience, but if you're wanting to, work through an experience and make it better. And then also maintaining, it's for rehab players, using visualization to maintain that confidence, seeing yourself on the mound before you actually go out there and do it. So there's a lot of different ways, but I absolutely love visualization.
So would you say that visualization is one of the keys that would help a player feel very comfortable and confident in an experience he's never done yet? So somebody that, say, got called up for the first time, or they're in the playoffs for the first time, by visualizing, because the mind doesn't know the difference between something real or vividly imagined, if they visualize over and over, by the time they get there, it's going to be like they've done this the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Visualization allows us to be a regular instead of a first timer. And now, although it's never going to be the same or as impactful as physically doing something, I would rather go into a situation I've never been in, having seen myself execute something 100 times over in my mind, than walking up and attempting it for the first time physically. So to me, there's so much benefit to it. And I think where people can get frustrated with it is that visualization isn't easy for everyone. And so I think that being able to, it is something you can practice. And just like anything, when you haven't trained or you haven't done anything, it could be hard at first. But learning those key things that can actually create a visual, vivid image and then continue to repeat it over and over again in your mind. I mean, I see so much benefit from it.
Yeah. And I think, the buzzword is visualization. I think for the people out there that say, I struggle at visualizing, I don't see visualizing, although the word by definition is picture.
Right.
I see visualization being taught to players and explained in strictly just that visual way. But to me, there's much more to visualization than just the ability to see a picture in your mind. So I would say for somebody that is more like auditory based, maybe instead of visualizing and seeing pictures, they can hear sounds of the game or the sound of their heartbeat. Or somebody that's more kinesthetic based, they may not be able to hear sounds or see images in their mind, but they can get that feeling of like the adrenaline of the game. They can get that feeling of being confident. So I think for the people that struggle out there with visualization, if they just change the word to imagine, then the word imagine is not strictly you're seeing a picture, you're hearing the sound, you're feeling the feeling. You're just imagining whatever imagining means to you. But in the buzzword feed, visualization is so much more cooler than the word imagine. Imagine sounds like very Disney.
Right. But I could not agree more with you. I think when I'm working with a player and the thing we're trying to improve on is how they deal with fearful situations, and we kind of break it down to physically what happens to them in those situations, we try and recreate that by telling ourselves a story in our mind and visualizing, but not really focusing on the image, focusing on the feeling.
Yeah.
And then being able to physically change that feeling and practice lowering our heart rate, practice taking a deep breath, practice, tension and release. So there's other things that you can do. So I love that you said that, because it can be used in so many different ways, not just like, okay, I want you to recreate a movie in your mind.
Yeah, there's a pink elephant right there. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So an interesting thing, and this is a question that I got from somebody else. They asked me, and I want to really ask you, because like you're in the trenches day in and day out with these athletes. Do you look at games differently, knowing some techniques that some players could be using?
110%. Yes, I do. I look at when I'm watching games, yes, of course, I'm watching to see they're executing and all that, but that's kind of secondary to what I'm looking for, because I'm looking for ways that performance can enhance what they're already doing on the mental side, of course. And now we are looking for more observables, which the mental game is not always observable. So to keep that in mind, we can find cues where, hey, I noticed you sped up here. Talk to me about that. What happened? And then we can dive deeper with them afterwards. But a lot of times, especially if I've worked with the player, I'm looking for what we discussed. I'm looking for the things that we talked about them working on, whether that's routine, whether that's slowing themselves down. It could be a million things, but whatever it is, I'm looking for that in how it's being executed and if it's helping. Because I'll tell you something, I'm not always right. There's going to be times where, and I tell my players this all the time, I'm like, you need to tell me, Lauren, that sucked. Because if you don't tell me, I don't know where to adjust. But that's what this is. This is kind of finding, again, what works best for you. I'm going to give you a ton of things to try. And then when we see something that really works, we're going to hone in on that and master that skill. But it doesn't always mean that what I give you is going to work. It's, okay, let's go execute, and let's see how it works for you. And a lot of times, sometimes something as simple as like intention, that's all it takes. So it's not like, I'm not like, I don't know, like figuring out something that's never been done before, it's just finding what works best for them. And a lot of that I get from just observing kind of their actions, their body language, like how they're handling pressure situations. Do they speed up? Do they slow down? Can you see that their mind's going a million miles a minute? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that high school athletes can really model from professional athletes is routines. Talk about a little bit the importance of routines.
Routines, to me, create ultimate intent and purpose. And I think those are the things that really are important when we're doing routines. Now, they can also combat things that we're dealing with. They give us kind of like if you think of like a hurricane, like the eye of the hurricane is like that routine, that moment in between what just happened and what's about to happen. And so we kind of get that little eye of the hurricane as like a reset button, a moment to ourselves, whether that's to refocus, flip the page, whether or not we just executed amazing or we just executed poorly or somewhere in between. It's being able to reset, and no matter where we were just a second before, just resetting back to that like that main level and then executing. Because sometimes when we do really, really well, our heart rate jacks up because we're stoked, we're excited, we're so happy, and we just are like, yeah, I got this. We get like so much confidence, almost too much confidence. And then we end up like, oh crap, that I didn't throw that very well. And then we go, okay, back to reality. I need to take a deep breath and get back to what makes me successful.
Yeah.
To me, routines are so important. It gives you that moment to kind of plan your next move, create that intention, and then put all that behind you, step up and execute.
Yeah. And it allows people to kind of maintain that balance and stay away from like the peaks and the valleys of the game and of the season.
Yeah, it maintains consistency throughout. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see made is when our routines and the way we set up for something changes based on our outcome. Kind of like what I said before, you could do so well, and then you're like, I don't need this, I'm feeling great. And then you go in, you're like, oh crap. Then you're like put back into reality. You're like, okay, I need to get back there. So if we're maintaining consistency as much as possible, you're going to have more consistent results. Not all the time, but instead of your highs and lows being like this, they're going to look like this.
Yeah.
That's really what we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of like challenges that like players face, you had a rather interesting challenge when you first came aboard with the Yankees, correct?
Yes. I don't speak, I speak English. Right now I'm not speaking it very well, but I can speak English. I don't speak Spanish very well. And despite having taken it like for 6 years through high school and college, I still didn't know much more than like how to say hi and my name is. So half of our players are Latin speaking players. And one of the biggest challenges for me was like speaking to them, because here they're coming from, English is easily their second language. Some of them, they don't even know English and they're just learning. And so I remember one day they all asked me, they were asking me like, Lauren, where do you live? And I meant to say 15 minutes that way, but I actually ended up saying 15 minutes yesterday. And they all lost it. They were laughing, they were cracking up. And I think the biggest thing I learned from that was once I owned the fact that I wasn't good at Spanish and that I was willing to make a mistake in front of them, it no longer scared me. For me, it was like that breakthrough moment is like once I faced the kind of that fear of looking stupid, and I was like, all right, they actually appreciated me looking stupid because they probably feel the same way trying to speak English for the first time. So for me, it was a great learning experience. And for a lot of them, they will teach me now. I will say like, how do you say this? And they'll teach me. And then they'll ask me, Lauren, how do you say this in English? And we become each other's teachers. But at first it was kind of a challenge because I will have to say I was pretty nervous to fail and sound stupid in front of them.
Yeah. And I think by, you having that little mess up there, that kind of broke down the walls on each side to have, a more close relationship with players.
The players and the players with the coach I think it affects everything. Because when players don't feel comfortable with you, they don't have a relationship with you, they ain't going to come to you, especially when they're feeling vulnerable. Especially if they're like, okay, well, I'm looking to improve this, or I'm like really struggling with this. They're not going to come to you. And I don't blame them. And I don't think I'd go to somebody that I struggled with something I didn't know. So relationship is everything. And then I think between the player and the coach, it's huge, but it is a two-way street. So I don't want to, because we have some, oh my gosh, I think I'm a little biased, but we have the best coaching staff ever. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with the coach. It's the players are a little afraid to go and approach the coach, and the coach has given them plenty of opportunities, whatever that is. And so I would say it goes both ways, that the coaches have to do a good job of opening the floor for them, giving them a space where they can come talk, and giving them like a space where they can have that dialogue and feel like they can talk to them. At the same time, it's the player's responsibility also to develop that relationship. If you want to get better, if you want more feedback, go tell them. They have several players to worry about. And so if you're not going up and asking them like, hey, I need help here, they may not realize it. And it may even not be like, I need help. It's like, I want to get better. So maybe an improvement thing. So I'd say it does come from both places.
Yeah, and that's so interesting that you're talking about that at the minor league level, because that so applies to college athletes, high school athletes. If you're an athlete in high school or college and you want more playing time, you're not getting it, be honest and ask the coach, what can I do to get more playing time? Is there something I need to do better? Is my role on the team, this guy's 1 year ahead of me and he's done after this year, and my role is just to push him to get better. What's my role on the team? How can I get better? What are you looking for me to do that I can help out this team better?
Yeah, totally. I think communication is so important from both ends, and whether it's coming from the coach or it's coming from the player. But at the same time, making sure that both like the players also know that it is their responsibility too.
Yeah.
To make that kind of relationship flourish too.
Yeah. And, it's a simple thing of just saying, hey, coach, when you have a few minutes after practice, here's what's on my mind, and I think that all coaches are very appreciative when somebody takes their time and asks them a question.
Exactly. And I even some of the sessions I have with players actually are, how do I approach the coach? How do I approach them, especially with something that maybe they're frustrated with? And so the other thing too is like, hey, if you don't know how to approach them, maybe reach out to somebody that that you're comfortable sharing that conversation with, and kind of like see what different ways that you can do it. Because sometimes, especially if it's things like I'm not getting playing time, like I'm better than him, but he's playing over me, like those are very emotionally charged frustrations. And so by kind of bringing it on back, thinking about it from the coach's perspective and what his role is, and that also can help kind of view it from maybe a different lens, and not being so caught up in why am I not playing? Why am I not getting the time that I deserve? So that's another thing that I think is important to know, is that sometimes it's not always black and white, like I want to improve, or like, hey, how can I get better? It might be something that is a little bit more complicated and needs some help navigating.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously keeping in mind what's in it for them, what's in it for the coach, So if a player were to go up in a more passive role of like, hey, how can I get better? What can I do to improve, get more playing time? If they start with that and then they still don't see the results, then yeah, they can go in the other way. And, what's holding me back,
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. But I think you're right. Like having that like self-reflective, like kind of mirror situation, like, hey, help me understand what I can do. Is always, I think, the best approach to go into. And then, maybe following up with more directed questions after that.
Yeah. Cool. I noticed that, I'll give you a shout out for your Instagram in a minute, but you're in the middle of a pretty cool book challenge that you got going on.
Yeah. One of my good friends who works for the Phillies, Hannah Huseman, she actually nominated me for the like 7 books in 7 days. And so I just finished that today. I didn't do it in 7 days, but there were 7 days total that I did it. So okay. Yeah, and I'm not always the best rule follower with those things. So I did give explanations, although I don't think you're supposed to. So, but there is also, if you missed any of them, I do have a book list on my Instagram that you can go to, and I have much more than those 7 that I shared.
Yeah. And out of those, if you had to pick like one to read over again, what would it be?
Ooh, out of the ones I posted, definitely the one I just finished, which is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. It's a little different than, it's mainly a story about him. So it doesn't go much into like the science of sports psychology, but it does lend to a lot of it without having like the science in it. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, that guy is pretty intense. But it's also kind of like a dialogue that really motivates me in the first place. So kind of that like no bullshit kind of I guess stance is kind of what motivates me. So when I read it, I was like, let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So overall speaking, what's that message that you feel is most important for the young athletes of today?
I think your mind is powerful, and we have complete control. And maybe not of everything all the time, but we can always lock into what we can control. And I think that the earlier we learn that, the earlier we learn ourselves and become self-aware of where we can kind of use our mind to really get us through some difficult struggles, or even the good times. The earlier we start, the better and easier it's going to be as we move forward. And so I'd say, if you're listening to this and you're in high school and you've been like really interested in the mental game, maybe you just don't know where to start. I'd say go explore and start early, because I know I'm biased, but I don't think that you'll ever regret it, because I think that it doesn't only lend to your sport, but it lends to life. So even if you're looking at the mental game just for yourself personally, I think there's a lot to gain from it.
Yeah. So getting this training now, when you're you're still in a state where you're still developing and you're still, you can learn very rapidly. It's so much more powerful and be so useful in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on. How about you give everybody a shout out to your Instagram there? They can go give you a follow.
Yeah, so you can find me at Lauren N. Abarca on Instagram, and on there I have a link to a bunch of other social platforms I'm on and a couple things I'm working on. So
yeah, absolutely. And I've been following you, and you put such great content out there. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So that was my interview with Lauren Abarca from the New York Yankees. And wow, such great information in such a short period of time. And I think the most surprising thing for me, like she mentioned, is the amount of fear that players deal with day after day, game after game, is something that I think amateur athletes and the general public will be quite surprised to know. And my other really good takeaway was about routines. You know, she says that once you have a routine, you have to stick to that routine and not just, abandon ship and jump off after a bad at bat or a bad game or two. The people that have the biggest long-term success, the higher up they go, are the ones that have this defined routine and then stick to it. And I thought that that's a very valuable piece of information for all amateur athletes out there. And I also want to say to go on and give her a follow over at Instagram at Lauren N. Abarca. She puts up such great content. I can't get enough of following her. So until next time, let's kick it over to the Zambonis, and we'll see you on the next episode.